I walked through the main entrance of the SEAL compound at Naval Station Norfolk at 14:30 hours on a sweltering August afternoon. The Virginia heat was oppressive, the kind that made even standing still feel like work. But I barely noticed it. After 15 years of operating in conditions that ranged from Arctic cold to desert heat that exceeded 120 degrees, a humid East Coast afternoon was just another environmental variable to process and ignore. I wore simple PT gear, gray Navy issue shorts and a matching t-shirt, both without any unit identification or rank insignia. My hair was pulled back in a regulation bun. I carried a small gym bag and wore running shoes that had seen better days. To anyone watching, I looked like someone who might be reporting for training, or maybe a contractor doing fitness assessment work, or possibly just lost. That appearance was exactly what I needed for this assignment. I was at Norfolk to observe SEAL candidates going through advanced training, specifically to identify potential recruits for a unit that existed so far in the classified shadows that even most senior officers didn't know it was real. My unit didn't have an official name. We didn't have patches or insignia. We didn't appear on any organizational charts. We were referred to, when absolutely necessary, by our operational designation, Tactical Solutions Group. TSG conducted operations that couldn't be acknowledged, missions that required capabilities beyond what conventional special operations could provide. We operated in territories where American military presence was officially denied, solving problems that governments couldn't admit existed. I commanded TSG, had for the past 7 years. Before that, I had spent 8 years as an operator in various classified programs, building the experience and capabilities that eventually led to my current position. But none of that was visible in my appearance as I walked into the SEAL compound that afternoon. I looked unremarkable by design, anonymous, someone who could be ignored or dismissed. I had credentials that would identify me if necessary. A simple ID card that showed my rank as major and indicated I had clearance for this facility. But the card deliberately didn't show what unit I belonged to or what authority I actually carried. That information was compartmentalized at levels that required specific need-to-know authorization. The SEAL compound was busy with afternoon training activities. I could see candidates running obstacle courses, conducting PT in formation, working through combat drills. The energy of the place was intense, that particular combination of aggression and discipline that characterized SEAL training. I walked toward the main barracks building where I was supposed to meet with the training officer to discuss which candidates might be suitable for TSG assessment. My meeting wasn't for another 20 minutes, so I was deliberately early, using the time to observe the base, culture, and see how personnel operated when they thought nobody important was watching. That's when Sergeant Williams noticed me. He was a SEAL instructor, probably mid-30s, with the build and bearing of someone who had spent his entire adult life in special operations. He wore the uniform with confidence, moved with aggressive purpose, and had that particular intensity in his expression that suggested he took his role as gatekeeper very seriously. He saw me walking toward the barracks and immediately altered his path to intercept me. His body language made clear that he viewed me as someone who didn't belong and needed to be redirected. I continued walking at the same steady pace, watching him approach through my peripheral vision while appearing to focus on the building ahead. He stepped directly into my path, forcing me to stop. "Hey!" His voice was loud and carried clear authority. "This is a restricted training area, SEAL personnel only. You need to leave." I looked at him with a calm, neutral expression. No challenge in my body language, no particular deference either. Just acknowledgement that he had spoken. "I'm authorized to be here," I said simply, my tone professional and even. Williams looked me up and down with obvious skepticism. He saw exactly what I had designed him to see. A woman in plain PT gear with no visible rank or unit identification, Someone who clearly wasn't a SEAL, who didn't look like she belonged in this environment. Authorized by who? Let me see your credentials. I pulled out my ID card and showed it to him. The card identified me as Major Claire Donovan, showed I had clearance for this facility, but provided no additional information about my unit or authority. Williams barely glanced at the card before dismissing it. This credential doesn't mean anything here. This is a SEAL compound. I don't know what unit you think you're visiting, but you need proper escort, or you need to leave. His tone had shifted from authoritative to aggressive. He had decided I was someone trying to access an area without proper authorization, and he was going to assert control over the situation. I have a scheduled meeting with the training officer in 20 minutes, I said calmly. Williams' expression hardened. I don't care what meeting you think you have. You're in a restricted training area without proper identification. That's a security violation. He pulled out his radio, clearly preparing to call security or his chain of command. Last chance. Either you leave voluntarily, or I have you removed by military police. I remained standing exactly where I was, my expression unchanged, my body language relaxed. I could have resolved this situation immediately by showing additional credentials that would have made Williams' face go pale. But I had encountered this kind of situation enough times over the years to recognize a teaching opportunity. Williams was operating on assumptions. He had looked at me and decided I couldn't possibly be someone with legitimate authority in a SEAL compound. He was protecting his space based on those assumptions without verifying whether they were accurate. That same kind of assumption-based decision-making was exactly what I assessed candidates for. Whether they could question their initial judgments, whether they verified before acting, whether they could recognize when their preconceptions might be wrong. So I made a decision. I would let this play out. See how far Williams would commit to his assumptions before reality forced him to reconsider. Sergeant, I said calmly, I'm authorized to be here. I have proper clearance. I have a scheduled meeting. I'm not leaving. Williams's face reddened. He wasn't used to being contradicted, especially not by someone he had decided was a security risk. Fine. You want to play it that way? Here's how this works. He gestured toward the PT area. 500 push-ups. Perfect form. Right now? You complete those, maybe I believe you have some kind of military background, and we sort out your clearance issue properly. You refuse, I call MP, and you get escorted off this base in handcuffs. Several other SEALs had noticed the confrontation and were watching with interest. I could see them exchanging glances, clearly entertained by what appeared to be their instructor, dealing with someone who had wandered into a restricted area. Williams was using push-ups as a punishment and humiliation tactic. 500 push-ups in the Virginia heat would be extremely difficult even for well-conditioned personnel. He was assuming I couldn't complete them, that I would either refuse or fail, proving his assumption that I didn't belong here. I looked at him steadily, calculating the situation. I could show additional credentials now. Could call my contact and have this resolved in 30 seconds. Could invoke authority that would make Williams wish he had verified before challenging me. Or I could do the push-ups. 500 push-ups would take approximately 40 minutes at the pace required to maintain perfect form. It would be physically demanding. It would be uncomfortable in the heat. And it would teach a lesson that went far beyond just this moment with this one instructor. I made my decision. I walked over to the PT area, set down my gym bag, and positioned myself in proper push-up starting position. Hands shoulder-width apart, body in perfect alignment, core engaged. Then I began. Down. Perfect 90-degree angle at the elbows. Up. Full extension without locking elbows. Controlled breathing. Steady pace. 1. Williams stood watching with his arms crossed, a slight smile on his face. He clearly expected this to last about 20 push-ups before I gave up or my form broke down. 2. 3, 4, 5. My form remained perfect. Years of physical conditioning across multiple operational deployments had given me capabilities that went far beyond what Williams could assess from appearance. 10, 15, 20. The smile was fading from Williams's face. Other SEALs were gathering to watch, initially entertained by what they thought would be a quick demonstration of someone failing to meet standards. 30, 40, 50. My breathing remained controlled. My form stayed perfect. Each push-up was executed with the same precision as the first. Williams was no longer smiling. He was watching with growing confusion, trying to reconcile what he was seeing with his assumptions about who I was. 75. 100. The crowd of watching SEALs had grown. They were no longer entertained. They were impressed. Someone maintaining perfect form through 100 push-ups without obvious strain was demonstrating capability that exceeded most personnel at their facility. 125, 150. Williams' expression had changed from confident authority to uncertainty. He was beginning to realize that something about this situation wasn't what he had assumed. But he was too committed to his course of action to back down now. 175. 200. I maintained steady pace, controlled breathing, perfect form. The heat was brutal, but I had operated in worse conditions. The physical effort was significant but within my capabilities. What mattered wasn't the discomfort. What mattered was the lesson being taught with each perfect repetition. That's when we all heard it. The sound of boots running fast across the compound. Multiple people moving with urgent purpose. Through my peripheral vision, I could see the base commander, Captain Rodriguez, sprinting toward the PT area with several senior officers following. His face showed stress and something close to panic. I continued my push-ups. 215. 220. Rodriguez reached the PT area, and his voice cut through the afternoon air with command authority that made every SEAL in the area immediately respond. Everyone in formation, now! The gathered SEALs, including Williams, immediately snapped to attention and formed up in ranks. The speed of their response showed these were operators who understood immediate compliance when their commander gave orders in that tone. I continued my push-ups. 230, 240. Rodriguez walked directly to where I was positioned, his boots stopping inches from my hands. Then, in a gesture that made every SEAL present go completely still with shock, the base commander dropped to one knee beside me. Major Donovan, his voice was tight with stress and respect. I had no idea you were on base. Please accept my sincere apologies for this situation. I continued my push-ups. 250, 260. Ma'am, Rodriguez continued, you don't need to continue. This is clearly a misunderstanding that I need to address immediately. I paused my push-ups, remaining in starting position, and looked at Rodriguez. Sergeant Williams assigned me 500 push-ups, Captain. I'm at 260. It would be undisciplined to stop before completing what was assigned. Rodriguez's face showed he understood exactly what I was doing and why. He stood and turned to face the formation of SEALs, all of whom were standing rigid with dawning comprehension that something significant was happening. For those of you who don't know, Rodriguez's voice carried across the entire formation. The person currently doing push-ups in our PT area is Major Claire Donovan. She commands a unit that I am not authorized to name or describe. Her security clearance is higher than mine, higher than the Admiral's, higher than almost anyone in the Department of Defense. I continued my push-ups while Rodriguez spoke. 280, 300. Williams stood in formation, his face cycling through expressions of shock, horror, and the sick realization that he had just forced one of the most senior special operations officers in the military to do 500 punishment push-ups. Rodriguez continued. Major Donovan was here to observe candidates for potential recruitment into our unit. Instead, she was challenged, threatened with arrest, and assigned push-ups as punishment for what Sergeant Williams assumed was unauthorized presence. 325. 350. The silence from the formation was absolute. Every SEAL present understood they were witnessing something that would define their understanding of judgment, assumptions, and respect for the rest of their careers. I reached 400 push-ups. My form remained perfect. My breathing was slightly elevated but controlled. The physical effort was significant, but I had trained for far worse. Rodriguez spoke again, his voice showing both respect for me and disappointment in his personnel. Major Donovan is demonstrating something that every one of you needs to understand. Discipline isn't about avoiding hardship. It's about maintaining standards regardless of circumstances. She's doing these push-ups because discipline is what separates soldiers from legends. 450, 475. Williams stood rigid in formation, his face pale, understanding that his career had just taken a catastrophic turn, and that the lesson being taught was as much for him as for everyone watching. 500. I completed the final push-up with the same perfect form as the first, then stood smoothly and faced Rodriguez. 500 as assigned, Captain. Where would you like to conduct our scheduled meeting? The formation remained silent. Every SEAL present had just watched something they would remember and discuss for the rest of their careers. The major, who was ordered to do 500 push-ups and completed every single one with perfect discipline. The teaching moment was complete. The lesson was taught. And Sergeant Williams would never make assumptions based on appearance again. Let me tell you what those 500 push-ups actually meant, since everyone watching understood the physical accomplishment, but most of them missed the deeper lesson being taught. I could have stopped Williams immediately, could have shown him credentials that would have made him realize his error within seconds, could have invoked authority that would have ended the confrontation before it escalated. But I chose to do the push-ups for a specific reason. Because in my line of work, discipline is the foundation of everything. Not the discipline of following orders blindly, but the discipline of maintaining standards and composure regardless of circumstances. Williams thought he was punishing me, humiliating me, proving that I didn't belong in his space. Instead, he was giving me an opportunity to demonstrate exactly why I commanded the unit I commanded, why I had the clearance I had, why I operated at levels that most personnel would never access. After Captain Rodriguez's announcement to the formation, the base commander escorted me to his office, while the SEALs remained in formation, processing what they had just witnessed. Rodriguez closed the door and immediately began apologizing. Ma'am, I cannot express how sorry I am for what happened. Sergeant Williams's behavior was completely unacceptable. He will face appropriate disciplinary action. I take full responsibility for the failure of my personnel to recognize your authority and treat you with appropriate respect. I sat down calmly, my breathing already returning to normal, despite having just completed 500 push-ups in oppressive heat. Captain, Williams was protecting his training area from someone he perceived as unauthorized. That instinct is good, even if his execution was flawed. What concerns me more is why he made the assumptions he made. Rodriguez sat heavily in his chair. He saw someone in plain PT gear without obvious rank or unit identification. He assumed you were a candidate or contractor who had wandered into a restricted area. He never considered that you might be someone with legitimate authority. Exactly. He judged based on appearance and made decisions based on that judgment without verification. That's the vulnerability I'm here to assess in candidates, whether they can question their assumptions, whether they verify before acting. I pulled out my tablet and reviewed my notes. I've been observing your base culture for the past hour before the incident with Williams. This isn't an isolated problem. I've watched multiple personnel make assumptions about others based on minimal information. Some of those assumptions were harmless, but in operational environments, Assumptions get people killed. Rodriguez nodded slowly. What do you recommend, ma'am? I looked at him directly. Williams made a mistake born from incomplete information and cultural conditioning. He needs to understand why his assumptions were dangerous. But I don't destroy careers over teachable errors. Want him assigned to my observation detail for the next 72 hours. He'll shadow me while I assess candidates. He'll see what my unit actually does and why his assumptions about capability based on appearance were so fundamentally wrong. Rodriguez looked relieved. That's very generous given what he put you through. It's practical. Williams transforming his understanding and then teaching others is more valuable than punishing him. But he needs to genuinely learn, not just perform to avoid consequences. Rodriguez made notes on his computer. I'll have the orders cut immediately. He'll report to you at 600 tomorrow. Good. Now let's discuss the candidates I'm here to assess. We spent the next hour reviewing personnel files for SEALs who might be suitable for TSG recruitment. Rodriguez provided insights on each candidate's performance, psychological profile, and capacity for operating in ambiguous environments. But my mind kept returning to that PT area. To Williams' face when Rodriguez had announced who I was. To the formation of SEALs standing rigid as they processed the lesson being taught. 500 push-ups in approximately 42 minutes. Perfect form, maintained throughout. Discipline demonstrated not through aggression or dominance, but through consistent execution of standards, regardless of circumstances. That's what made TSG different from conventional special operations. We didn't select for physical dominance or aggressive confidence. We selected for psychological resilience, cultural adaptability, and the discipline to maintain operational standards in environments where there was no oversight, no backup, and no possibility of recognition. Williams had assumed I didn't belong because I didn't look like his mental image of an elite operator. That same assumption was exactly what made my operators effective. We operated in spaces where enemies made the same mistakes Williams made, where people underestimated us based on appearance until it was too late. After my meeting with Rodriguez, I returned to my temporary quarters on base and reviewed footage from the incident. The base had extensive security cameras, and I had authorized access to all surveillance systems. I watched Williams approach me, watched his body language shift from authoritative to aggressive, watched him make assumptions and commit to those assumptions without verification. But I also watched what happened after Rodriguez arrived, how Williams stood in formation processing the magnitude of his error, how the other SEALs watched me complete the push-ups with expressions shifting from entertainment to respect to understanding. That moment, that demonstration of discipline over ego, had taught a lesson that would spread through the entire SEAL community. The story would be told and retold. The major who was ordered to do 500 push-ups and completed every one without complaint or excuse. The next morning at 600, Williams reported to my temporary office. He stood at attention, his face showing he had spent the night processing what had happened and understanding how close he had come to destroying his career. Sergeant Williams reporting as ordered, ma'am. I gestured for him to sit. At ease. We're going to spend the next 72 hours together. You're going to observe while I assess candidates from my unit. You're going to learn why the assumptions you made yesterday were dangerous. And you're going to decide whether you can transform your understanding or whether you'll remain trapped in biases that limit your effectiveness. Williams sat rigidly, clearly uncomfortable. Ma'am, I need to apologize for yesterday. My behavior was completely out of line. I made assumptions that had no basis in fact. I disrespected you and violated basic protocols for verifying credentials. There's no excuse for what I did. You're right that there's no excuse. But I want you to understand something. Your assumption wasn't unusual. It was typical. Most people look at me and don't see someone who commands the most classified unit in special operations. That disconnect between appearance and reality is exactly what makes my operators effective. I pulled up files on my tablet. Over the next 3 days, you're going to watch me assess SEAL candidates. You're going to see what I actually look for. And you're going to learn why physical appearance, aggressive confidence, and obvious dominance are often inversely correlated with the capabilities my unit requires. Williams looked confused. Ma'am, I thought special operations valued physical excellence and aggressive action. Conventional special operations do. My unit operates differently. We conduct missions in environments where physical dominance and aggressive confidence get you identified and killed. We need operators who can blend in, who can be underestimated, who can operate invisibly until the moment action is required. I stood and walked to the window overlooking the training areas. Yesterday you saw someone in plain PT gear and assumed incompetence. Enemy forces make the same assumption. They see operators who don't fit their mental image of threats, and they underestimate. That underestimation creates opportunities that conventional operators can't access. Over the next 3 days, I took Williams through my assessment process. We observed SEAL candidates in various training scenarios, but I wasn't evaluating what conventional instructors evaluated. I watched how candidates interacted with support personnel, whether they treated people with respect, regardless of rank or position, whether they questioned assumptions or accepted surface information. I observed how they handled ambiguous situations, whether they could operate without clear guidance, whether they maintained discipline when nobody was watching. I assessed their cultural awareness, whether they understood that capability came in unexpected forms, whether they could recognize value in people who didn't fit obvious patterns. Williams watched me take notes, interview candidates, make assessments that had nothing to do with physical performance or aggressive confidence. On the second day, he finally asked the question I had been waiting for. Ma'am, why did you actually do the 500 push-ups? You could have stopped me immediately, could have shown credentials that would have ended the situation in seconds. Why let it escalate? I looked at him directly. Because discipline is what separates soldiers from legends, Sergeant. You thought you were punishing me. Instead, you were giving me an opportunity to demonstrate exactly why I command the unit I command. 500 perfect push-ups with no complaint, no excuse, no ego. That's discipline. That's the standard my operators maintain regardless of circumstances. Williams processed that for a moment. Most officers would have pulled rank immediately, would have used their authority to shut down the situation. Most officers are concerned with ego and respect for position. I'm concerned with operational effectiveness, and operational effectiveness requires discipline that transcends ego. Completing those push-ups taught a lesson to everyone watching that words never could have taught. On the third day, Williams had transformed visibly. He watched candidates with different eyes. He questioned his initial assessments. He recognized that the operators who looked most impressive weren't always the ones with the most valuable capabilities. At the end of 72 hours, I conducted his final evaluation. Sergeant, what did you learn? He thought carefully before responding. Ma'am, I learned that I've been assessing people based on how closely they matched my mental image of an elite operator. Physical presence, aggressive confidence, obvious dominance. But those traits are only valuable in specific contexts. They can be liabilities in environments where blending in matters more than standing out. I nodded. What else? I learned that discipline isn't about following orders blindly. It's about maintaining standards regardless of circumstances. You did 500 push-ups not because you had to, but because discipline requires completing what was assigned. That level of self-control is what separates exceptional operators from merely good ones. And? Williams met my eyes. I learned that my assumptions almost destroyed my career. If you had chosen to pursue formal discipline, I would have been finished. Instead, You chose to teach. That choice demonstrated more leadership than anything I've seen in years of service. I stood and walked to where he sat. Sergeant, you made a mistake born from cultural conditioning and incomplete information. You're not the first person to underestimate me based on appearance, and you won't be the last. What matters is whether you learn from it. I pulled up a document on my tablet. I'm recommending you for instructor development program. You're going to teach new SEALs about assessment, assumptions, and the danger of judging capability by appearance. You're going to use what happened between us as a case study, and you're going to help create cultural change that prevents future incidents. Williams looked stunned. Ma'am, you're promoting my career after what I did? I'm investing in transformation. You demonstrated capacity to learn and willingness to question your assumptions. That's more valuable than punishing you would have been. The question is whether you'll use this opportunity or waste it. I won't waste it, ma'am. I promise. Don't promise me. Prove it through your actions. Williams left my office a different person than he had been 72 hours earlier. He had learned lessons that would shape the rest of his career and influence hundreds of SEALs he would train in the future. And the story of the 500 push-ups would spread through the special operations community as a reminder that discipline mattered more than ego, that assumptions were dangerous, and that the person you underestimated might be the most accomplished operator you'd ever meet. Captain Rodriguez found me that evening as I prepared to depart Norfolk. Ma'am, I wanted to thank you for how you handled the situation with Williams. Lesser officers would have destroyed his career. You chose to transform him instead. I transformed a teaching moment into actual teaching, Captain. That's more valuable than punishment. Rodriguez smiled. The story is already spreading through the base. Every SEAL here now understands that appearance doesn't indicate capability. That lesson will influence this command for years. Good. That's exactly what I hoped would happen. I departed Norfolk that evening, having identified 3 candidates suitable for TSG assessment, and having planted lessons about discipline, assumptions, and respect that would spread far beyond the base where they were taught. 500 push-ups in the Virginia heat. 42 minutes of perfect discipline. A lesson that would be remembered and retold for years to come. That's what separated soldiers from legends. Not physical dominance or aggressive confidence, but the discipline to maintain standards regardless of circumstances, the composure to turn humiliation into teaching, the understanding that true power never needed to announce itself. The 3 days I spent at Norfolk assessing SEAL candidates revealed exactly what I had suspected. The base had excellent operators with strong physical capabilities and tactical proficiency, but they were missing the specific qualities that TSG required for operations that couldn't be acknowledged. I had identified 3 candidates with potential, but they would need extensive additional assessment and training before I could determine if they were suitable for my unit. The first candidate was Lieutenant Marcus Chen, a SEAL with 8 years of experience who had conducted operations in 17 countries. His file showed excellent tactical performance and multiple commendations. But what caught my attention wasn't his combat record. It was a notation in his psychological evaluation that described him as overly thoughtful and hesitant to commit to aggressive action without complete information. Those traits were considered weaknesses in conventional SEAL operations. For TSG, they were potentially valuable capabilities. Operators who questioned assumptions and required verification before acting were exactly what I needed. I interviewed Chen in a secure facility away from the main base. No uniform requirements, no formal protocol, just conversation to assess how he thought and made decisions. "Lieutenant," I began, "tell me about a time when your initial assessment of a situation was completely wrong." Chen thought for a moment, clearly surprised by the question. "Ma'am, during an operation in Syria, we received intelligence that a specific building housed enemy combatants. The building matched all indicators. Right location, right type of structure, thermal signatures suggesting occupation. I was prepared to authorize entry when something felt wrong. The thermal patterns didn't match typical enemy behavior. I delayed the operation despite pressure from my team to move immediately. What happened? Further reconnaissance revealed the building was occupied by displaced families hiding from the conflict. If we had entered as planned, we would have terrified civilians and potentially caused casualties. The actual enemy position was 2 buildings away, with nearly identical thermal signature. How did your team react to your hesitation? Some were frustrated. They saw delay as weakness. But the intelligence officer supported my decision to verify. We adjusted and conducted the operation successfully against the correct target. I made notes on my tablet. What did that experience teach you? That initial assessments are often incomplete. That verification prevents catastrophic errors. That being certain before acting matters more than being fast. Those were exactly the lessons TSG operators needed to internalize. Chen was a strong candidate. The second candidate was Chief Petty Officer Sarah Mitchell, a communications specialist who had served with SEAL teams for 12 years. Her file showed she was technically excellent, but had been passed over for promotion twice, with evaluations noting she was not aggressive enough and too focused on process over results. Again, traits that were considered weaknesses in conventional operations, but might be strengths for TSG. I met Mitchell in the same secure facility. Chief Mitchell, why do you think you've been passed over for promotion? She answered without hesitation or defensiveness. Ma'am, I don't fit the expected profile for SEAL leadership. I prioritize planning and verification over immediate action. I question assumptions. I'm more comfortable with ambiguity than certainty. Those traits are valued differently depending on the operational environment. Give me an example. During a mission in Afghanistan, we were coordinating with local forces. The team wanted to trust our Afghan partners completely because they had performed well on previous operations. I insisted on maintaining operational security protocols and limiting information sharing. Several team members saw this as insulting our partners and creating unnecessary friction. What was the outcome? 2 weeks later, we discovered one of our Afghan partners was compromising operations to enemy forces. If I hadn't maintained protocols, several missions would have failed, and American lives would have been at risk. The team leader acknowledged my judgment had been correct, but my evaluation still noted I created unnecessary tension with partners. How did you feel about that? Mitchell looked at me directly. Ma'am, I don't operate for evaluations. I operate to keep people alive and missions successful. If that means taking positions that aren't popular, that's acceptable to me. That answer told me everything I needed to know. Mitchell was an excellent candidate. The third candidate was different from the other two. Petty Officer James Rodriguez had only 4 years of experience and wasn't a SEAL. He was an intelligence analyst who supported SEAL operations, but had repeatedly requested direct operational training. His file showed exceptional analytical capabilities, but noted he was physically inadequate for direct action roles and better suited for support functions. I met with Rodriguez in the secure facility, curious about why someone with his analytical talents would want to leave that role. Petty Officer, why do you want to be an operator instead of continuing analytical work where you're clearly valued? Rodriguez shifted uncomfortably. Ma'am, I'm good at analysis, but I see the limitations of my work. I provide intelligence to operators who make decisions in the field, but I don't have the operational experience to understand the context they're working in. I want to bridge that gap. To combine analytical capability with direct operational experience. You understand you'd be starting from scratch in terms of operational training. Your analytical background wouldn't give you any advantage in that regard. I understand, ma'am. But I also see that most operators don't have strong analytical backgrounds. They make tactical decisions without the analytical framework that would improve their effectiveness. If I could combine both capabilities, I could contribute in ways that pure operators or pure analysts can't. That perspective was exactly what TSG needed. Operators who could think analytically while executing tactically, who understood that intelligence and action weren't separate functions, but integrated capabilities. Give me your assessment of current SEAL training methodology. Rodriguez looked uncertain whether he should speak honestly. Ma'am, I'm not qualified to critique SEAL training. I'm not asking for qualifications. I'm asking for your analytical assessment as someone who supports operations but isn't embedded in the culture. Rodriguez took a breath. SEAL training produces excellent tactical operators. Physical capabilities are exceptional. Tactical proficiency is world-class. But there's limited emphasis on cultural intelligence, analytical thinking, or operating in ambiguous environments where tactical superiority doesn't apply. The training optimizes for direct action, but not for operations that require invisibility, patience, or cultural integration. That analysis was more sophisticated than most senior officers could provide. Rodriguez saw patterns that operators embedded in the culture couldn't recognize. All three candidates showed potential for TSG operations. But potential wasn't enough. They would need to undergo assessment processes that would reveal whether they could actually perform at the level my unit required. I was preparing to depart Norfolk when Sergeant Williams requested one final meeting. He entered my office with an expression mixing respect, humility, and something that looked like determination. Ma'am, I wanted to ask you something before you leave. Go ahead, Sergeant. Would I be eligible for assessment for your unit? I looked at him carefully, assessing whether this was genuine interest or an attempt to repair his damaged reputation through association with TSG. Why would you want to be considered? Because the past 3 days changed how I understand operational effectiveness. I've spent my career believing that physical dominance and aggressive action defined elite operators. But watching you assess candidates showed me capabilities I didn't know existed. Capabilities that I don't have, but recognize as valuable. He paused. I don't expect to be accepted. I'm probably not suitable. But I want to be assessed because the process would teach me things I need to learn. Even if I fail, that failure would make me a better instructor. That answer suggested genuine motivation rather than reputation management. Sergeant, TSG assessment takes 6 months minimum. Most candidates wash out. Those who succeed often have capabilities they didn't know they possessed. Those who fail learn things about themselves that are uncomfortable but valuable. I understand, ma'am. I'll forward your file to my assessment coordinators. They'll contact you with next steps. But understand that your incident with me won't give you any advantage. If anything, it will make assessors more skeptical about whether you can question your assumptions effectively. That's fair, ma'am. Thank you for considering it. After Williams departed, I sat in my office reviewing the past 3 days. One major teaching moment with the push-up incident. 3 strong candidates identified for further assessment. One unexpected candidate who might have potential despite his initial error. Captain Rodriguez found me preparing to leave. Ma'am, I wanted to share something. Since your visit, we've had 12 additional personnel request information about assessment for classified units. Your demonstration of discipline and the lessons taught through the Williams incident have motivated people to question their assumptions about what elite operations actually require. That's good. Question leads to growth. Rodriguez handed me a tablet. I also wanted you to see this. It's the training guidance I'm implementing based on observations from your assessment process. We're adding modules on cultural intelligence, analytical thinking, and questioning assumptions. Not replacing physical training or tactical proficiency, but supplementing with capabilities your visit highlighted as valuable. I reviewed the guidance. It was well designed, incorporating lessons without compromising the core SEAL training methodology. This is excellent work, Captain. Implement it and track results. If it improves operational effectiveness, share it with other SEAL commands. I will, ma'am. And thank you again for how you handled the Williams situation. Lesser officers would have destroyed a career. You created transformation. Instead, transformation is more valuable than destruction. I departed Norfolk that evening, my assessment complete. 3 candidates identified for further evaluation. Cultural change initiated that would spread through the SEAL community. And a story about 500 push-ups that would be told for years as a reminder that discipline mattered more than ego. The flight back to my classified facility gave me time to reflect on the mission. The primary objective had been to identify TSG candidates. That objective was accomplished successfully. But the secondary outcome, the cultural impact of the Williams incident and the push-up demonstration, might prove more valuable than the candidate identification. Stories spread through military communities. The right stories, told properly, could shift culture more effectively than any policy directive or training mandate. The story of Major Viper doing 500 perfect push-ups after being challenged by a SEAL instructor who didn't recognize her authority would become legend. It would be told to new SEAL classes. It would be referenced in leadership courses. It would remind thousands of personnel that appearance didn't indicate capability, that assumptions were dangerous, and that discipline separated soldiers from legends. That cultural impact was worth far more than finding a few candidates for my unit. I returned to TSG headquarters and immediately began processing the 3 Norfolk candidates through our assessment pipeline. Chen, Mitchell, and Rodriguez would undergo 6 months of evaluation that would reveal whether they possessed the capabilities TSG required. But I also made a note about Williams. His request for assessment suggested genuine transformation rather than reputation repair. If he maintained that motivation through 6 months of evaluation, he might surprise himself with what he was capable of. The Norfolk mission was complete. Candidates identified, lessons taught, cultural change initiated, and 500 push-ups completed with perfect discipline in the Virginia heat, demonstrating that true power never needed to announce itself, and that the most effective operators were often the ones who looked least impressive until the moment their capabilities were required. 4 years after that afternoon in Norfolk, I sat in my office at TSG headquarters reviewing operational reports from teams deployed across 3 continents. The unit I commanded had grown from 18 operators to 24, with capabilities that continued to evolve as we refined our operational methodologies. Lieutenant Marcus Chen had completed assessment successfully and was now operating in Southeast Asia, conducting intelligence gathering that conventional forces couldn't access. His ability to question assumptions and verify before acting had already prevented 2 operations from catastrophic errors. Chief Petty Officer Sarah Mitchell had also passed assessment and was currently deployed in Eastern Europe, coordinating with local assets. Her insistence on maintaining protocols despite pressure to trust partners completely had identified 3 compromised sources before they could damage operations. Petty Officer James Rodriguez had surprised everyone, including himself, by not only completing assessment, but excelling at operational training that combined his analytical capabilities with newly developed tactical skills. He was now in North Africa conducting operations that required both precise analysis and direct action. All 3 Norfolk candidates had proven suitable for TSG operations. But the 4th candidate, the unexpected one, had provided the biggest surprise. Sergeant Williams had entered TSG assessment with everyone expecting him to wash out within weeks. His initial error with me had created skepticism about whether he could truly question his assumptions and operate without ego. Instead, Williams had transformed completely. The 6-month assessment revealed capabilities he hadn't known he possessed. More importantly, it revealed his capacity for genuine growth and willingness to operate in ways that contradicted everything he had believed about elite operations. He had completed assessment 18 months ago and was now a TSG operator conducting missions in South America. His latest report showed he had successfully infiltrated an organization by appearing unremarkable and non-threatening, using the exact opposite approach from his previous SEAL methodology. But Williams's most significant contribution wasn't his operational work. It was what he had done before joining TSG full-time. During his 6 months of assessment, Williams had returned to Norfolk periodically to conduct training sessions with SEAL candidates. He taught cultural intelligence, analytical thinking, and most importantly, the danger of assumptions. And he always began those training sessions the same way, by telling the story of the 500 push-ups. I had received a message from him last week. "Ma'am, I just finished teaching a class of new SEAL candidates at Norfolk. When I told them about ordering you to do 500 push-ups, I could see the same assumptions I had made reflected in their faces. By the end of the session, those assumptions were shattered. Thank you for turning my worst mistake into my most effective teaching tool." The story had spread far beyond Norfolk. It was now used in leadership courses across all branches of military. The tale of Major Viper and the 500 push-ups had become a standard case study in training about assumptions, discipline, and respect. Captain Rodriguez, who had been promoted to commander, had sent me data showing measurable impact at Norfolk. Since implementing training based on lessons from my visit, SEAL operational effectiveness had improved by 17%. More significantly, incidents of disrespect toward support personnel and non-SEAL military members had decreased by 43%. The cultural transformation I had hoped for was happening. Not just at Norfolk, but spreading through the entire Special Operations community. Yesterday, I received an unexpected communication from the Secretary of Defense requesting my presence at the Pentagon for a briefing. The message was vague about purpose, but clear about importance. I arrived at the Pentagon this morning and was escorted to a secure conference room where I found an audience I hadn't anticipated. The Secretary of Defense, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and commanders from every branch of Special Operations. The Secretary opened the briefing. "Major Donovan, we've asked you here to discuss the cultural transformation occurring across Special Operations forces. Multiple commands have reported significant improvements in operational effectiveness, personnel retention, and cross-functional collaboration. When we investigated the source of these improvements, every analysis pointed back to methodologies and lessons originating from your unit and your training approaches." He pulled up data on the main display. SEAL commands report 17% improvement in operational effectiveness. Army Special Forces show 22% improvement in intelligence gathering. Marine Raiders demonstrate 19% improvement in mission success rates. All of them credit training that emphasizes cultural intelligence, questioning assumptions, and understanding that capability transcends appearance. The Chairman of the Joint Chiefs spoke up. "Major, we want to institutionalize these approaches across all Special Operations training, not replacing current methodologies, but supplementing them with the capabilities you've proven valuable. We're asking you to develop comprehensive training curriculum that can be implemented at every Special Operations school." I had anticipated this conversation eventually. TSG methodologies had proven so effective that it was inevitable leadership would want to scale them beyond my unit. "Sir, I can develop curriculum. But I want to emphasize something critical. These approaches work because they challenge cultural assumptions that are deeply embedded in military thinking. Implementing them will create resistance from personnel who believe traditional methods are sufficient." The Secretary nodded. "We understand. That's why we're not making this optional. Cultural intelligence and assumption questioning will become mandatory components of all Special Operations training. We have buy-in from every Special Operations commander in this room." I looked around the table. Generals and admirals who commanded the most elite military forces in the world, all nodding agreement. "I'll develop the curriculum. But I want to include one specific case study in every course. the story of the 500 push-ups. It teaches every lesson we need to convey more effectively than any abstract instruction could. The SEAL commander, a 3-star admiral named Peterson, spoke up with a smile. "Major, that story is already legendary in the SEAL community. Every new class hears about it. The officer who was challenged to do 500 push-ups and completed every one with perfect discipline. It's become the defining example of how we teach about assumptions and respect." Exactly. Because it's not abstract theory. It's a concrete demonstration of discipline over ego, capability transcending appearance, and the danger of judging without verification. After the briefing concluded, Admiral Peterson approached me privately. "Major Donovan, I wanted to tell you something. 4 years ago, when the incident with Sergeant Williams happened, I was skeptical about your decision not to pursue formal discipline. I thought you were being too lenient." He paused. "I was completely wrong. Your choice to transform Williams rather than destroy him created more value than I could have imagined. He's become one of our most effective instructors. The training he conducts has influenced hundreds of SEALs, who now operate with capabilities they wouldn't have developed otherwise." I appreciated his acknowledgement. "Admiral, Williams was willing to learn. That's what made transformation possible. Some people can't question their assumptions even when shown they're wrong. Williams could. That made him worth investing in." Peterson nodded. "The broader lesson has spread throughout our community. We're producing operators who think more clearly, assess more accurately, and operate more effectively because they've learned to question their initial judgments." That evening, I returned to TSG headquarters and found a message waiting from Williams, now operating under the call sign Viper 7. "Ma'am, I just completed an operation in Colombia that succeeded entirely because I looked unremarkable, and the targets underestimated me. 4 years ago, I would have approached this mission with obvious confidence and aggressive posture. I would have been identified immediately, and the operation would have failed. Instead, I used everything you taught me about invisibility and underestimation. The mission succeeded with 0 complications. Every time I operate this way, I remember those 500 push-ups and what they represented. Thank you for not giving up on me." I saved that message alongside hundreds of others from operators whose careers had been shaped by lessons learned through TSG methodologies. But I also reflected on the journey from that hot afternoon in Norfolk to today. 500 push-ups that had taken 42 minutes and taught lessons that spread across the entire special operations community. The story would continue to be told. New classes of SEALs, Special Forces, Rangers, and Raiders would hear about Major Viper and the 500 push-ups. They would learn that discipline mattered more than ego, that capability transcended appearance, that assumptions were dangerous, and that the person you underestimated might be the most accomplished operator you'd ever meet. That cultural transformation was more valuable than any single operation TSG could conduct. It represented fundamental change in how the military understood effectiveness, assessed capability, and developed leaders. I pulled up the curriculum I would develop for the Pentagon. It would include technical content about cultural intelligence and analytical thinking, but at its core would be the story of those 500 push-ups and what they represented about discipline, respect, and the danger of judging without verification. Sergeant Williams had thought he was punishing me that afternoon. Instead, he had created a teaching moment that transformed not just his own career, but the entire special operations community. And I had completed those 500 push-ups, not because I had to, but because discipline required it. Because maintaining standards regardless of circumstances was what separated soldiers from legends. Because the lesson being taught was more important than personal comfort or ego. 4 years later, that lesson continued to spread. Commander Rodriguez was implementing it at Norfolk. Williams was teaching it to new operators. Admiral Peterson was institutionalizing it across SEAL commands. and the Pentagon was about to mandate it across all special operations training. The 500 push-ups had become more than a physical demonstration. They had become a symbol of what discipline actually meant. Not blind obedience to authority, but commitment to standards that transcended circumstances, ego, and personal comfort. That's what made TSG operators different. That's what made our missions succeed when conventional approaches failed. That's what made the cultural transformation possible. And it all started with a SEAL instructor who made assumptions, a major who chose discipline over ego, and 500 perfect push-ups completed in the Virginia heat. The work would continue. The missions would evolve. The culture would keep transforming. But the lesson remained constant. Discipline is what separates soldiers from legends. Capability transcends appearance, and the person you underestimate might change everything you think you understand about operational effectiveness. That was the legacy, Yafwine, of the 500 push-ups. Not just a story about physical endurance, but a fundamental shift in how an entire military community understood respect, capability, and the danger of assumptions. And as I began developing curriculum that would influence thousands of future operators, I knew that story would be told for generations. A reminder that true power never needed to announce itself, that discipline mattered more than dominance, and that the most effective operators were often invisible until the moment their capabilities were required. The 500 push-ups were complete. But their impact would continue long after I moved on to whatever came next. Because that's what legends did. They transcended the moment of their creation and became lessons that shaped culture for years to come. And sometimes, those legends began with someone making a mistake, and someone else choosing to teach rather than punish.